You're cold, not just from the chill in the air, but from the stone floor beneath your back. There's no mattress, just a pile of straw that smells of mildew and decay. Your skin itches. You've been here for days, or maybe weeks. Time moves differently when there are no windows, no clocks, and no hope. You owed £7. Not a fortune, just enough to be noticed. A few missed payments, a creditor who lost patience, and suddenly the world as you knew it collapsed. They didn't come for you like they do criminals in the night. No, this was a performance. The town crier read your name aloud. People stared. Children whispered. Your wife cried quietly, holding onto your sleeve until a guard pulled her back. Now she's gone. And you're here, in this cell, with nothing but debt, cold, and silence for company. What crime did you commit? None, really. At least, nothing that would be considered a crime today. You simply failed to pay what you owed. But in the 1700s, debt wasn't a financial status. It was a moral failing. And moral failings were punished with chains. So when people ask, what happened to those who couldn't pay their debts in the 1700s? The answer isn't just a matter of old laws or dusty policies. It's a story of lost freedom, broken families, and a system that treated misfortune like sin. In the 1700s, debt wasn't just seen as an inconvenience or a personal hurdle. It was treated as a character flaw, an accusation against your honor. Society didn't separate financial trouble from morality. To owe money was to admit you had failed, not just in business, but in life. Religion played a part in this judgment. Being unable to pay your debts was seen as being out of alignment with God's order. After all, a righteous man paid his dues, cared for his household, managed his affairs. If you didn't, something must be wrong with you, spiritually wrong. That made the punishment easier to justify. Jailing someone for debt wasn't seen as cruel, it was seen as necessary. The system needed to cleanse itself of weakness, laziness, or bad judgment. And so the law allowed creditors to seek imprisonment, not as a last resort, but as an acceptable, even expected outcome. It didn't take much. Miss a few payments, fall behind after death in the family or a bad harvest, and your name could be dragged before a magistrate. No grand jury, no trial, just a declaration that you owed and that you hadn't paid. In both England and colonial America, this process was common. It happened quickly, and once set in motion, there was almost no way to stop it. Debtor's prison became the sentence for anyone who slipped through the cracks. You didn't have to be dishonest, just unlucky. And in an era where survival often depended on credit and informal lending, most working-class people were never more than a few misfortunes away from arrest. This wasn't about justice. It was about control. A society obsessed with order couldn't afford to look weak in the face of poverty. So it turned debt into a crime and suffering into a lesson. Inside the prison walls, the punishment didn't stop at confinement. It deepened, day by day. Debtors' prisons weren't publicly funded institutions of reform. They were often privately run and built to generate profit. And that's where the cruelty sharpened. You had to pay for everything. Your cell, your food, your blanket, even the shackles they locked around your ankles. Everything had a cost. The very act of being locked up created more debt. If you couldn't pay, you didn't eat. If your family didn't bring food from the outside or money to bribe the jailers, you went hungry. Rats were common companions. So were lice, bedbugs, and disease. Typhus, dysentery, and fever swept through prisons like fire through dry grass. The air was damp, heavy, and sick. There were no rehabilitation programs, no counselors, no one trying to help you get back on your feet. The point of debtor's prison wasn't restoration, it was containment, shame, removal. And perhaps the cruelest part? The daily charges kept stacking. Prisons often charge rent for your cell, a penny a day, 2 pennies if you wanted to sleep near the wall instead of the middle of the room. By the time a debtor served 6 months, they might owe more than when they went in. You could write letters, of course, plead with friends or distant relatives for help, but if no one answered, you simply waited and waited until you were either paid for or forgotten. Some men rotted in prison for decades over debts that were never more than a few pounds. Others died nameless, their bodies unclaimed, their stories lost. And all the while, the system kept running, quietly efficient, quietly brutal. It didn't care about your intentions. It didn't care about your family. It cared about the balance. And as long as that number was unpaid, you remained behind the iron. The injustice of debtors' prison didn't end with the individual. It swallowed families whole. Reform didn't come swiftly. It took decades of witnessing quiet tragedy, of stories told through novels, newspapers, and protests, for the public to begin questioning this system. Writers like Charles Dickens used fiction to shine a light on what too many had chosen to ignore. His father had been imprisoned in Marshalsea for debt, and Dickens never forgot it. Through his books, he gave voice to those who couldn't speak. He turned statistics into human beings. Gradually, pressure mounted. In the United States, most states banned debtors' prisons by the 1830s. England followed a few decades later, passing the Debtors Act of 1869, which reduced imprisonment for civil debts. The system was dismantled, but not erased. Because while the prisons closed, the judgment remained. Today, we don't throw people in cells for unpaid bills, at least not officially. But we still punish the poor. We still trap people in cycles of debt that are nearly impossible to escape. Predatory lenders, payday loans, medical debt, student loans, they all carry the same quiet weight. And the shame? It lingers, just like it did in the 1700s. People today are told that being poor is a personal failure, that struggling with money is a matter of character, not circumstance. But history tells a different story. It tells us that debt has always been dangerous, not because of what it is, but because of what people do with it. It's been used to control, to imprison, to shame, and to profit. So when we ask what happened to people who couldn't pay their debts in the 1700s, the answer isn't buried in the past. It's reflected in the present. We may not have debtors' prisons anymore, but for millions, the bars never really came down. The truth is, money has always been more than just currency. It has been a measure of trust, of class, of control. In the 1700s, a small unpaid debt could cost you everything: your home, your family, your dignity. And while the chains may look different now, the weight of financial struggle feels just as heavy. What we inherit from that era is not just history, it's the echo of a warning that when systems are built to punish instead of protect, to profit from the desperate instead of uplift them, we all lose something. Maybe not our freedom, maybe not our homes, but our humanity. So when you walk past someone drowning in debt, remember, it's not always a choice. Sometimes it's a sentence written long before they ever had a chance to speak. And sometimes the prisons we build aren't made of walls, but of silence.